Hello, everyone. More than halfway through, 2/3 of the way through. Week 4 is complete. We're into week 5 already. Thank you for all of your excellent contributions, the great discussion, the good work on your assignments. Several of you pointed out that this week's discussion was, I don't know what word to pick, was not as invigorating as some of the past weeks, that it wasn't as clear cut, that the material wasn't quite as engaging. And I hear that clearly, and I'm going to pass on some of that feedback to the lead instructor who designs the course. As I said in the discussion forum, I realize that this book does have some age to it, and that perhaps there are some other sources that we could look at that might be more up to date. However, I do think a lot of the insights are still true, and a lot of the principles that are in this book are still helpful to us as we try to make our internal communication more effective and more responsive and more encouraging for employees. So the discussion from this week, what things do employees need to know? What are the things that are important to them? And again, as some of you pointed out, this isn't really rocket science. Some of the things are pretty obvious, that it's clear that employees need to know what their jobs are, have clear definitions of what the expectations are, that employees need to know what the policies are, what possibilities there are for advancement. That several of you pointed out also that knowing the financial position of the company, knowing what's going on as far as the company's stability and prospects for the future, that those things are all of those things are important. All of those things matter. And effective internal communicators would make sure that employees were clear about all those things. The other thing that I wanted to talk about this time around was just the assignments. That we had 3 assignments this week. I know that even though 2 of the assignments were review assignments, so they weren't really intense, still to have 3 different things that you have to work on was a pretty busy week. And so likewise, that will be a pretty busy time for me to grade all of those things. And as I said to you when I sent out the email about the assignments, I'm not going to do a terribly close reading of the reviews. The purpose of those 2 assignments was just to give you some ideas. The professional bio review is to give you some ideas about what makes a good professional bio. The blog review was to give you some ideas about what a good blog looks like, to help you with writing your own professional bio and writing a blog post, which will happen in week 6. So I will give you some feedback on your professional bio. I'm really looking forward to reading the rest of those. I hope that it will be something that's useful to you, something you could use on your LinkedIn page, something you could use on your website if you have a website, and that it will help you promote yourself to potential employers. This week, we will be discussing the transition curve, change and transition. I find this one of the most helpful frameworks in the course. This is a paradigm. It's a way of looking at the world. It's a way of looking at change, making the distinction between change, what happens outside in the world, the circumstances, what changes, and what happens internally, which they label transition. So change happens in the world, and it causes feelings of transition in us. So there's a pattern that most people follow as they deal with big changes, where they move from denial through anger, through acceptance, and then commitment to advancing in the new reality with the new situation, with either new leadership or new policies and procedures, or perhaps even a new position. And that this is a pattern that most people follow. One thing that might not be as clear in the reading is that this isn't a claim that everybody follows the same pattern all the time. And you may have picked up on this because one theory has 4 stages, another theory has 7 stages. Obviously, they're very similar, but there are nuances. And everybody doesn't follow the stages the same way. People can go back and forth. Just like some of you might be familiar with Elisabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. It's not that everybody moves through those stages in a progression in a straight line on a timetable. Some people, they'll get started with denial, they'll move through anger, but then they'll move back into denial. It's just too overwhelming, so they'll move back into denial. And that's true with the change curve or the transition curve too. Sometimes people move back and forth between the stages. However, even though it's not a formula to figure out how everybody's going to respond, it is a framework that helps us understand how most people respond generally in a lot of circumstances. So it can be a way of looking at change and looking at people's experience of transition that can help us respond to them in ways that are more helpful. So that someone who's in denial, the way to respond to that person is to gently provide more information so that they can begin to see what's really happening. So it gives us some tools to respond better to people, and that's the point of learning something like this. The last thing I want to talk about very briefly today, don't want this to be too long, is the leadership essay. The final version of the leadership essay is due on Saturday. I'm going to send out a little more information about that in an email and post an announcement. If you have any questions, about the feedback that I gave you, questions about other possible sources that you could use to develop your essay in a particular direction, I gave each of you some feedback on the particulars of your essay. So, for example, some of you talked about the value of listening, so I gave you a resource that you could use to build on that. Others of you talked about servant leadership, so I gave you a resource you could use to build on that insight. But I'll post a bunch of that stuff in an announcement and an email. But if you have any questions, please reach out to me. And I know time is always short, so don't be afraid to send me a text message or even pick up the phone and call if you have something that you want to talk about and you're on a short timeline. So thanks again for all of your really good work, and I look forward to this week's discussion and to reading the final versions of your authentic leadership essays. Take care.